Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. It's really nice to see a good audience turn out. Welcome to the Holcim Foundation Awards Talks, where we provide a platform for change accelerators working towards a more sustainable built environment. Holcim Awards Talks delve into questions inspired by our winning projects, exploring them through the lenses of multidisciplinary experts. Each panel discussion aims to create a dynamic exchange of ideas, providing deeper insights into the experts' experiences with the topic in question. My name is Kimberly Bradley. I'm your moderator for tonight. I'm a locally based art critic, culture writer, educator, and sometimes moderator. And our panelists will introduce themselves in a moment, but the topic in question for tonight is maximizing impact, urban infill lessons from Holzmarkt, which is where we are right now. The world's most significant sustainable design prize, the Holcim Foundation Awards, will explore positive effects of well-executed urban infill projects like Haus 2+, a new mixed-use sustainable development built here in Holzmarkt by Office ParkScheerbarth, and it's right next door to where we are right now. As a best-in-practice urban infill example, Haus 2+, which received a Holcim Foundation Bronze Award in 2023, shows how community-driven development and socially engaging design improve our neighborhoods. We'll also talk about bricks, an earlier infill example by Berlin-based architecture firm Graft, which emerged from different conditions in the city's Schöneberg district. Both projects show how infill can impact cities with a low carbon footprint. And again, tonight we're going to see short presentations by our three panelists who will introduce themselves in a moment, and then we'll have a good, healthy discussion and questions at the end. There's time for Q&A at the end, about 10 or 15 minutes, so think of questions as we go along. I think I have to click, sorry. But I will give the clicker to Mujin Park of Office ParkScheerbarth, and she'll describe the project for you.
Thank you for having me today. I'm Mujin Park from Office ParkScheerbarth, and I'm the one half of the two-partnered office. And I'll get right into it. Many of you might already be familiar with this, but I would like to just give you a quick background. So the Holzmarkt that we are in used to be one of Berlin's central lumber port, up until early 19th century, I believe. And later it was part of the border zone of GDR, and it ended up left as a vacant brownfield. And reunification happened, and then in 2003, it turned into an iconic Berlin techno club, which is Bar 25. Fast forward to 2012, it saw the beginning of now what we know and see as Holzmarkt 25, which is a cooperative cultural quarter, which receives almost 1 million visitors a year. And last year, we added Haus 2+ to this creative village. And it's three-story timber building, cladded in bright red wood, and marking the main entrance. So besides aiming to build as sustainable as possible, what we wanted was to make a statement and signal the new, but at the same time integrate it with this patchwork of buildings around. Its distinctive curve consists of very simple geometric volumes, and it adds new dimension to existing Holzmarkt aesthetics. And 2 square meter building offers 6 units, 3 small and 3 big. It now home to a bakery and a tattoo studio on the ground, and a booking agency and artist atelier on the first, and photo studio and physiotherapist on the second floor. So the Haus 2+ is attaching itself to the existing staircase of the concert venue, which we are meeting today, and to reduce the CO2 intensive circulation space. It also uses the existing basement as part of the foundation and taps into the district heating as a major energy source. Distinctive recess on each floor and shared terrace that adds to very dynamic transition zone and creates small and intimate public space at the entrance. And lastly, a few notes on the structure system before I hand over to Niels, who from Rewatch, who we had a very great pleasure working together on this project. It is built with 3 different timber structure, massive timber for the interior stiffness and compact timber box elements for the slabs and timber frame structure for the exterior wall. And it is all regionally prefabricated and assembled with the screws instead of glue for the easy disassembly and reuse in the future. Niels.
Yeah, thank you, Mujin. I'm Niels Mavis, senior structural engineer working for Rewatch, and I was, as Mujin said, the responsible technical designer for this beautiful building you can see. So, yeah, working with Mujin and Ben from beginning of the project until its project end. Sorry for going through the cards. Although it's the smallest, or one of the smallest buildings in our portfolio, it has roughly the same amount of complex and challenging details and connections as any other bigger or way bigger structure. So this made it...
That's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. No, it made it very interesting, and that's what I want to say. Because you've probably noticed, at least on the slides here, or maybe you've been around, the round shapes, the openings, the doors and windows, and obviously also the overhanging structure, or like it said here, the recess. This isn't usually fit for a timber construction or timber engineering. It lives usually more, the timber engineering lives more of a simple slab to beam, beam to column, and column to foundation or wall to foundation system. So we've had to reroute a lot of the gravitational forces and come up with nice ideas. Sorry. Yes. But that's what I wanted to say. The compelling and complex architecture is one of Rewatch's, of our key success factors. We usually find ways to into such projects. Now I will maybe still stay here. What we don't like is to always build the same repetitive design all over again, and I think that is what most of the people here and in overall Berlin also like to see, because our nature isn't shaped like that. If you walk around, you see always a different environment, and that's what makes this at Holzmarkt and also Berlin so creative, rich and diversified. And maybe I'll go through our slides to show a few projects that are related to Infill in Berlin, despite obviously Holzmarkt. We are an engineering boutique, which means we all offer all different consultancies around the built environment, except architecture. That's why we needed Mujin and Ben. With our office found in 1995, so almost 30 years now, we're since then helping shaping and forming Germany. Adding to this, one of our key driving factors in the last many years is to reduce the carbon footprint. And exactly this building, Holzmarkt, that we are discussing today or tonight, is one of the best practices of it, because it's a complex architecture. This is compelling, and on the other hand, it has a great carbon-reduced level. Yeah, a few of our infill slides. One of my colleagues is also sitting in the audience. He's working on this one, for example, which is close to the Ostkreuz. I want to highlight this slide. This is not entirely our own idea that is behind that, but it's actually a PAS standard from the UK, where we are originally from, which shows that actually the biggest impact, obviously, in building construction to reduce the footprint is build nothing, since that is not necessarily what we all want to do, but still always the best practice to ask again, do we really want to build this? Do we want to build it here or there? Is it necessary to build at all? If you're coming to the conclusion that you want to build, then the next step, and that's what we've taken here, is to build less and to build efficiently. Yeah, I think I can hand over to Sven now and give you the pointer.
So hello, I'm Sven from Graft. I'm partner at Graft. We are architects. We are working in Berlin. I am here because I'm older. Mujin, you told me that this is your first build project. Congratulations.
Thank you.
When I started at Graft 22 years ago, urban infill was quite a thing in Berlin, as there were unused areas everywhere. Today it has changed. Today our tasks as architects have changed because there is not space everywhere for everybody. And when I'll bring something, it's quite contradictory to what you've done here. The example I want to share with you is something completely different, is Hauptstraße in Schöneberg. Here you can spot our site pretty well in the middle of the picture before we built anything, because there was nothing, except the whole area was completely sealed, as it was a space which used for the post office next to it, and it was area for moving around vehicles, nothing else. After our job was done, it looked more like this. So we pretty much filled it up and used the space in a complete different context. It was really part of the urban fabric. It was part of a block. It was not adjacent to any blocks. It was incorporating a lot of, I even lost the English term, Denkmalschutz, heritage protection, yeah? Laws to challenge the adjacent protected building next to it. It's always a difficult thing in Berlin. If there is a protected building, you should not compete with it. It is desired to more support it. However, this site here worked out very well, is pretty much accepted, and to discuss things later for urban infill, it might have to do something with this entrance, which is different as planned, but this comes with challenges of urban infill. We planned here a free access for all people, but authorities were afraid that this brings too much noise into the block, so restriction was made for access. We can speak about that when we speak about challenges with urban infill. However, it worked out very well and it looked nice. And what turns out with this building is that's the only design of Graft where I've been 2 times taking photographies or showing people the building, where strangers approached me and congratulate for a nice facade, which I've never experienced before. So maybe that it looked nice was helping as well a little bit. However, I'm happy to share with you thoughts on urban infill and share some of my expertise on that, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, all three of you. Some of this I knew, and some of it fascinates me, how you came up with your ideas and some of the issues. We're going to discuss in a few kind of subtopics or directions, and we'll start with sustainability. And we'll start with Haus 2+. Mujin, the architecture press called Haus 2+ like a friendly parasite. Because if you go next door, you see the red house, but the stairway that goes up the red house is actually the fire escape to this building. It's docked onto this building in a very interesting way. How did you come up with this kind of parasitic design? Did you think of it like that during the design process? And what would you consider the most innovative aspects of the design in terms of sustainability?
This docking nature, I think, comes to a lot of urban infill projects, so I cannot say I come up with that idea from the beginning. And this actually friendly parasite nickname I quite fond of. So for this project, I cannot say there was this single very innovative side of the project, since as for the many buildings or projects built in this dense urban context, the site and the complexity it brings were very intricate. And so our response had to also match this complexity. And on one hand, there was technical challenges, probably Sven, you also experienced in much larger scale, to also build in sustainable manner with the tight budget and this constrained site. So, as you mentioned, we use existing resources such as existing staircases, circulation space, or, as I mentioned in the presentation, this existing basement to overcome this limited footprint and generate a little more use space. And there are other tricky details which probably Niels can share more too. As you mentioned, this is a fire staircase that we had to attach with the timber building. But at the end, we almost built almost everything entirely with timber, which we are very proud of. But this design inspiration, I think it comes a little more from the other aspect of the site, which was this rich context of Holzmark. This is an unusual context to building into. And we wanted to as I said, make a statement, and also wanted to stand out. But at the same time harmonize to this very colorful, almost sometimes hectic surrounding. And so we used this curved geometry and very prominent a single color to bring this boldness, but at the same time, I think at the end, the materiality and this playfulness of design helped the project to fit back into the context. And there's other elements such as natural ventilation. Niels and I spoke long about it, about the life cycle of the building. And also we even used the river water for the green roof irrigations, and or exposed utility for flexible building use. And such thing as, I think for the innovation for our project came more into this combining all these little actions and weaving these elements to make a compact but still very vibrant building is, I think, to us what it was. Yeah.
How did this fit the client's vision? Because this was a brief, if I understand correctly. It was a brief from the Holzmark.
So the brief was actually really brief and succinct. But actually we developed this basically how this building can be with the client over time with the design. So at the beginning we were asked to build a timber addition to the entrance, 4 to 6 units with the potentially roof terrace, and that's what we delivered. But
it's a really brief.
Yeah. But I think that through the design, the wishes comes and then possibilities pops out, and that's how the building got more interesting. So I believe this process of design was truly collaborative with clients rather than we got this deck of brief and then we tried to solve the problems. And another unique aspect of this site was the speed of construction they wished for. So in the summertime, today is quite, in the summer and the winter it doesn't look like it, but in the summer they receive as much as 3,000 to 4,000 visitors a single day. And so keeping entrance operational as long as possible, and ideally not during the summertime. And also to minimize construction time was the non-negotiable from the beginning. And then timber was there already very beginning of the design, and then it fit right into this corresponding to a time constraint. And we thought it's quite interesting to use timbers, seeing the history, how it was the timber port in the past, and yeah.
Holzmarkt means
yes.
wood market. Niels, we talked earlier when we first looked at this house about a week ago about how the timber use here is really unusual compared to your former experience. Could you talk about how it was unusual and what the normal limitations of the material were or are, and how you coped with them in the construction of House 2+?
Yeah, maybe to not make it too complex, we split this into two parts, because on one hand it was very unusual, as you said, and on the other hand, obviously a few things, like Mujin already mentioned, are speaking for timber and the timber construction in itself, yeah, in a very positive way. Mentioned earlier, this is not necessarily a timber architecture. You have the overhangs, you have areas where timber is actually a lot under pressure, to put it like that. And timber doesn't like pressure. Timber likes a broad wall or something to dispense the loads on. So we had to find solutions for that, for example, where we introduced actually hardwood instead of a normal coniferous wood, as you know it, as a standard for the market. Which, interestingly, was not that expensive at the time, because it's such a small construction, and the construction company actually said, oh yeah, we have this column lying around, you can have it, like that. That was very nice. And then we have very short spans, which also speak themselves for a timber construction. The maximum span is 5 meters, that is a typical timber construction span. So actually there are many factors that are positive for or speaking for a timber construction, which is yeah, the reason why it was also invented or introduced here. We have this existing basement which was only designed to take more or less a fire truck. Yeah, so maybe the red painting also comes from this heritage. But so we haven't had too much to play with in the basement, and timber as a very light material, prefabricated material, was fast on site. The construction itself of the timber part of the building took roughly 2 weeks only. So all this spoke for a timber construction. Now, coming to the second part, how did we overcome this? Those hurdles that are not necessarily timber fit, like the overhangs, the cantilevering parts in technical terms. This was made through engineered wood, through also the hardwood, as I mentioned. Mujin already mentioned it in the beginning, that we have introduced different timber materials. We had to keep the slabs as light as possible. We have here hollow core slabs, which some know from the company Lignatur from Switzerland, for example, or Kerto from Finland. These are an excellent structural and technical methodology to have the material where you need it. You need the material at the supports. You need the material at the top of the slab and at the bottom of the slab, and all the infill in between, or most of the infill, can be reduced to save a material itself and weight. We also find that in concrete slabs, for example. I don't know, there are a few architects around here and other technical personnel. A few of you would know that, but others maybe don't. So there are plastic bubbles introduced in concrete slabs to reduce the concrete weight of a slab and the material that's been used. And that is more or less exactly what has been here the case with the timber. So it is engineered wood. You have the timber on the bottom, the timber on the top, and in between just a few so-called flanges to connect these two layers together. So we have been, or we have had to be as efficient as possible to reduce the weight on the existing basement, and just to be honest and to close with the last part, we had also to extend the basement a bit with a small concrete strip around it and a few piles actually. The existing basement is also set on piles, so it was a bit reinforced, the whole thing, but in the end, basically, the existing basement is supporting this new construction. And to come to your sustainability question, and that is also one of the key factors of a carbon-reduced construction, get rid of the basement. All the basement is usually a carbon intensive construction, usually built with concrete, with reinforced concrete that takes or consumes usually a huge part of the overall carbon emissions of a construction. So if you get rid of this, you can reduce the carbon footprint very, with a high impact, to say.
No basements, if possible.
No basements, if possible, of course.
Are the techniques you used transferable to larger scale projects? Because this is a small building.
Yeah, Sven and I had that discussion. Oh, you're asking Sven.
Wait,
Sorry.
I'm asking either of you. If you'd both like to chime in, it would be great.
We had the discussion. It is obviously a small construction, and this kind of architecture it's difficult to just copy paste it to a bigger construction. But I think the trouble usually with timber, also what we have had the experience here, obviously, is that timber usually is very expensive, at least in Germany, and it is difficult to really apply that to a bigger structure. Usually the client doesn't bring or is not willing to pay this extra price. I say usually because it's not always the case, obviously, but it's usually more difficult. And what we also don't have to hide here is this is a so-called Gebäudeklasse 3, which is a very small building. And in Germany, other rules apply if you go beyond 400 square meter, for example, and timber becomes much more difficult to apply. But obviously, we also have much bigger construction with timber, and I can only promote timber, at least for the slabs, because if you're using slabs in concrete, usually that takes up again the major part for carbon emissions, not regarding the basement. So there is usually a huge lever to reduce carbon emission to be sustainable. Yeah. So also difficult to determine this term. But Sven, maybe you can also add.
Yeah, it's you have said it, most of it already. This is fine, it's perfect. It's this Gebäudeklasse 3 is literally the Gebäudeklasse where you still have a certain fun and where regulations are less strict, especially when it goes into fire regulation. I don't know, how many architects are here when we speak about Gebäudeklasse? Is it like blah, 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 or can people follow, yeah? So maybe briefly, you have in Germany 5 classes of buildings. Class 1, 2, 3 is you can do nearly everything. And class 4 and 5 is far more regulated, especially in terms of fire protection, which is a big deal when it goes into technical equipment of a building and into construction. And so this is why with Gebäudeklasse 1, 2, 3, you can play around a lot more. But you have said it as well, besides that if a building is bigger, it's most likely not Gebäudeklasse 3 anymore. It is challenging-wise comparable, because most of the buildings have the same amount of corners and edges, and the corner and the edge is difficult. It's the slab or in between is mostly the more easy part. Yeah. So if you have solved this, you have touched most of the challenging points.
Let's shift over a little bit into the social aspects of infill and the social aspects of Haus 2+ in specific. So in our conversations before this one, you mentioned something super interesting, that the red building narrows the entrance to the public spaces of Holzmarkt, making it a bit more intimate. There's something more inviting about not a big wide entrance. How did Haus 2+ in particular improve the social structures of the space in other ways? Like, could you explain if that was part of the design process, if it kind of was realized later, if it came from the client in his brief?
The change of social structure is difficult to describe, but I can explain what happened spatially around. So before the project, the space around the plot had intermediate scale. That it was the neighboring, the facing tiny building was there before, but that the site where this Haus 2+ is sitting was empty. And also they didn't have any distinctive offering on the ground to suggest this is the main entrance to the whole Holzmarkt area. And we actually, before the project, we spoke with the client long about maybe this addition could create an intimate space, and by narrowing the entrance, almost like an Italian alleyway, which is, in Berlin, there's the scales of streets, scales of public space is rather large. And when you look at it now as an effect, I think it's really unusual for Berlin. In terms of scale, it's maybe very short. And I think it works really well, and I personally very much like it. And so it, as you mentioned, it invites visitors in by making a little more vibrant, like a small intimate space, and also it expands the offering of Holzmarkt towards the street. Besides that, when we are touring, that we also mentioned that each unit of the building has their own unique way of interacting with outside. And the tenants also have a tendency wanting to look outside. And then I think this three-dimensional interaction make the space experience way rich for passerbys and tenants looking down. And even in between tenants, they can have interaction, not only on the ground floor, but just with by engaging with this kind of lived facade. It's a little cheesy word, but this kind of more activated facade part with the balcony, French windows. So that would be another aspect.
Did you know who some of the tenants would be before, as the building was being constructed, or did that come later?
We only knew the bakery that were to come at the very beginning of the planning, because it was technically more challenging, or it has to be considered. That's why it was known before, but the others, I think, came more later, almost when the building was finished.
I mean, this is part of the social aspect too, maybe knowing who is part of the community that's being attracted or served. And Sven, I'd like to direct a question to you, because you've been doing infill for a long time. How do urban infill projects contribute to existing communities? And that's a huge question in Berlin because there was so many gaps starting in the 90s after the wall fell, for example. How have communities been integrated in the design process, if at all, or how do architects consider them?
Well, when we put it in relation to House 2, then let's put it that way. First, urban infill is successful if it contributes something to the community. And there are numerous urban infill projects out there which didn't do so, and this is why they were not so successful or not accepted. Yeah? And House 2 Plus is interesting because it is a kind of a triple urban infill. When you go it backwards, then House 2 Plus is an urban infill into Holzmarkt. It's more a building infill, but let's play with this urban infill little. Whilst Holzmarkt is an urban infill in a broader, bigger, more problematic thing, which is, or which has been known or is known as Mediaspree, which is supposed to be an idea of an urban infill within the fabric of Berlin, in then starting where urban infill starts normally, an industrialized area which has fallen out of use and which needs to be redensified, reintegrated into the urban fabric. And with all those steps, kind of, Mediaspree didn't contribute enough at all to the community. This is which gave one of the basements or foundations for Holzmarkt being there and contribute something which can be experienced, which can be enjoyed. And based on that, what already paved road, you could say, again, House 2 Plus is contributing additional space, which, when I was right, is serving already existing tenants or people around here. So this is going down the further line. But yeah, urban infill rule for success is contribution, and a contribution which can be experienced. Otherwise, your urban infill is always under challenge. Is it by people or by neighbors or community in general? It only is accepted if it contributes.
How is that actually measured? How do you really know that a contribution has been reached, that the community doesn't protest?
I'm not so sure if it's a soft or hard factor, but if a demand is, if there is certain demand and you can provide something, or if you create something which is desired, this is potentially factors with what you can measure success of an urban infill or contribution. What you do needs to be, need to provide additional value to the people. And this can be very different. Here it is a space for designers, an art space, commercial space, certain way. In other urban infill projects, it is more based on housing. In others, it might be very important to bring more office to a certain environment. I don't know. However, urban infill is always about that there is space which is unused or just a sore for the eye, and then it is changed into something more useful. It's finally let into a use.
I wonder sometimes how much of acceptance or success of an urban infill project has to do with how the project is communicated to the users, which is a weird word. I don't know if any of you would have anything to say about this. Maybe Sven again?
So let's put the other way around. What is most challenging for urban infill? I think the biggest challenge for urban infill is noise. You know that, and this is maybe an issue at Holzmarkt as well, I don't know. But the problem with an urban environment is that from a physical point of view, it's too loud. It is too loud to live there. It is too loud to sleep there with an open window. It is, in general, it's always too loud due to whatever. And if you add something to an already loud environment, it is very tough to make it less noisy. You will increase noise. And from a regulation point of view, this added noise is the most challenging thing for all urban infill projects in Berlin. If you add housing, traffic is already too loud. If you add commercial spaces, it might interfere with housing. When we look into our project in Schöneberg, where we had the idea of a huge opening in the facade where people can pass through to have a nice travel route from a commercial district to a more residential district, really create a shortcut. The shortcut is in general beneficial for everybody. Authorities felt, oh, it's too loud when all those people go through there. We can't allow this opening. So they forced us to close this huge opening with a glass door, which can only be opened by residents to avoid too much conflicts with the neighbors. However, the existing post building had an opening which was already there. And what authorities have created is still a shortcut, but it's more interesting than it had been designed by us, because people now go through all those courtyards in a diagonal path through the whole development. So you can say this one thing is the regulation, which gives us a hard time, but it created something far better by circumstance, not by plan. Yeah. But strongest thing from us, from a regulation perspective, is noise, and then the other thing is really not necessarily marketing or promoting it the right way, but really find or spot the gap. What do people miss? And this is here pretty well spotted and can be experienced pretty well.
Eugene, I'm going to ask you an extra question. How did you deal with the noise or possible noise in Haus 2+?
So this is not really a residential area. I think that kind of reduces the challenge of dealing with the noise. But it's, I think Holzmark in general has a little more, it's a larger scale. There's a noise issue as an operating, which, you know, if you are next to the water, the noise reverberates way longer and wider and unexpected direction that you cannot really expect. It's sometimes recently we had a tour with students and we were actually speaking quite quiet in our side, and they said they were on the other side the night before and then they could hear way louder, and they were so surprised how quiet it is here actually. So certain things are really out of control, especially when you involve the water. And I think noise is sometimes fall into architects' hand to control, but it's really difficult. I think besides the noise, I would like to kind of answer back that you mentioned if the communication could be encouraging the acceptance, or we had a little bit of side note, we had a different project, which our office was very nervous that it's not gonna work in terms of permission, because it's a little controversial high-rise project, and the district asked us to make a public vote. We thought it was the end of the project, but what we did was we communicate very openly. I know this is not typical building you will vote for, but what this could offer and what is in turn that it could be publicly beneficial to project, not because there's a lot of times the project were vilified by looking, oh, they're making something that I cannot enjoy. And so I think we openly communicated, and then it actually worked, the strategy worked, and then we got voted yes to get a permission to the project. So I think actually it's not so much about the marketing, but open communication to the immediate neighbor is very important, because it's unavoidable that you will cause an inconvenience, even while they're building the project. And I think as an architect, it's very important not only consider the aspect of the site you're building in spatially, but also the temporal layer. It's not only about what was there before and what's to come, but also what you're causing, the duration of the time of the construction, and which is, I think, sometimes overlooked in temporal layer of the site. And everybody who lives in Berlin experiences some sort of an inconvenience, whether there's construction of your favorite U-Bahn station, or on your street there's something is happening, you have to reroute on the train, or all sorts of things. And then this kind of awareness, you are influencing more wider people than you think. I think this awareness is very important. And the good question is to ask, like Sven mentioned, what can you give back for this inconvenience? And kind of take it as an opportunity to reflect on what's missing on the site and what could you offer back as kind of reward in a way. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic that you actually had a vote. I didn't know this.
It's a long story.
That the answer was yes. Let's zoom out even more to the whole city of Berlin and its infill history and infill practices. Is infill different here? Sven, this is kind of a question for you. Different here than in other cities? I think immediately post-wall it must have been. But how is it now?
I'm sorry, it's not special anymore. It is in Berlin. It is the same challenge like in all West German cities, where we try to differentiate from desperately. It had been different, but what is driving the change is the cost of land, and this is significantly has an impact on your urban infill project. As long as you find whatever way to circle around high land cost, you have a lot more flexibility because the less money is involved, the more risk is everybody willing to take. And this is what makes urban infill so comparable all over Germany, or maybe even broader, is an avoidance of risk. It is just to make nothing wrong, to be very sure about everything is lowering variety or speciality a lot. And then you play on a communicational level with a certain aspect of your infill. You promote your courtyard, which is now better than it had been before, or you create a shortcut. But based on an overall view, many urban infills are very comparable always, and this makes it different, not between Berlin and the rest of the world, always unique in terms of the routes the urban infill can create within a certain district or in an urban fabric. But challenges or results are, the more expensive it gets, the more comparable all over, unfortunately.
Could you talk also a little bit about policies, regulations, and how challenging they have been or still are in Berlin, and how you as an architect navigate these?
From reusing not necessarily urban infill, because what urban infill is was here within the S-Bahn ring in Berlin is transported a little bit more to the outskirts, and it is still happening in the outer areas of Berlin. But what comes in as a new interesting issue is environmental protection, especially if sites aren't used for a long time. Other inhabitants have chosen those sites. Certain animals, very often protected, figured out that this unused space is surprisingly calm, not under much pressure, and they settled down there. And this is then creating another interesting point, that with old industrial areas or unused site in the densest area of Berlin or other cities, you have very often a real environmental action plan you have to respect, because there is living something, protected species, and you need to figure out what this species is after, if you can collect it and transport it to another site, if you can incorporate it in your future use. So with that, this is really an additional challenge which is new and more coming up in the recent years. Yeah. So this is adding to money and noise, is an interesting environmental challenge. I don't want to make it, it is fair and it's necessary to respect, but it is very interesting that challenge you so much in really inner cities. And when you ask for urban infill as an answer to avoid land use, to bring something in plan, just instead of growing urban fabric out in urban sprawl, then it is quite surprising that you have the same challenge in inner city districts today.
I mean, this connects, or am I interrupting you?
No, I was going to mention that this challenge is unexpected. I think it's because a lot of times when it's beginning of the project, you see it in this kind of zoomed out, like in German you call Schwarzplan, and then there's empty plot thinking, oh, there's nothing, I can build something. And then you actually go there, and then for this also specific history of Berlin, how long certain area was overlooked and almost untouched, like so-called death strip that we are sitting on also, like these border zones. And I think that's also, it's not only about the green space, sometimes the subculture that you might be replacing, you might be faced that you will have to replace these areas. And I think a lot of Berlin projects who would replace this stuff, like either animal, green space, or subculture will face pushback. And I think it's important kind of also aspect to see this new nature, basically, how they can be mapped and then communicated before that you recognize this is an empty plot, you can build it. I think there's some I think that's welcoming, some part as a welcoming change to maybe have a new category of a plot. So to say that this is a new nature. Last year, I think we saw a really interesting documentary. It's called Urbana Natura. And this scholar from Britain, I think, mapped out these, the subtitle is Berlin Prache. So he mapped out a bunch of these areas which turn into almost like a second nature in Berlin, and then how they can be received. And then what's interesting for that was even some species which was natural, he was biologist, natural to Berlin. And then in almost like a metaphorical way, that's sometimes how urban infill can be accepted too, like these newcomers can be accepted, but that's a little sidetracking for me.
It is connected to the question that Sven asked a while ago in your pyramid, whether infill should be built, something built. You know, it's sometimes a blurry line.
Yeah, guilty, I want to build.
Or
yeah.
Niels said that. It was Niels' pyramid,
Yeah,
sorry.
Niels said, building nothing.
No, you're right. I think what we didn't touch on yet regarding this aspect is that usually infill, or maybe infill in the terms of topping up on something or annexing something that we did here, is also technically quite challenging usually, because most of the time you're connecting to something that is already existing, that was already built by someone else, maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago. I often get the question, Niels, why is everything taking so long? Why is it so expensive? Why are they still building on it since 5 years or 10? Usually this lies also in those surprises you find on site. You know, you're going out there and then you're looking into the existing building that you're connecting to or topping up on, or and then even if you have a thorough look into the existing structure, which is always difficult because existing building usually has inhabitants, or users. This is one of the challenges that is mostly not met properly, let's say, because it's so difficult to foresee. And this makes it also very difficult, or this is one of the hurdles, and that's not specific for Berlin. That is always a challenge. Maybe adding to what Sven said is we can't or Berlin, for example, is a good example maybe because it is surrounded by another federal state. So you can't grow out of or into an urban sprawl until infinity, yeah. And people are still wanting to come to Berlin to live here, to find also a affordable place to live, which is becoming more and more challenging. So you start to rethink about infill and refurbishment again, because it becomes more and more also financially interesting to add. Instead of building on the green field, untouched field, it is more and more interesting to fill something. And I think I've seen it 3 years ago or so. There are plans around the S-Bahn ring to build on top of the S-Bahn ring stations high-rise buildings like 150 meters or so, that is something that 20 years ago no one would have considered, because it's so complex, it's so challenging with the Deutsche Bahn together, I'm not saying any bad stuff about Deutsche Bahn, but it's another stakeholder that is coming into the discussion, yeah, obviously. But nowadays we have to rethink it, and you probably all heard about the plans that that a certain part of the population wants to infill actually around the Tempelhofer Feld. Yeah, that is ongoing discussion since years, and people need the space, so it's an obvious discussion. But yeah,
we're reaching the end of our discussion time and coming close to the question and answer period, so think in the audience what you'd like to ask. But I'd like to throw to all three of you a question cluster of what the best practices of infill might be in terms of innovative materials, the best construction techniques, the most social engagement, and the things that one can best do to create a circular economy in all ways. It's a heavy question cluster, but it would be a nice way to end, to think of the best practices.
I can start. I think we actually indirectly touched upon a lot of aspects, like hinted at what could be the good practice to do the infill. And as Sven mentioned, contribution and synergy with the existing structure is one aspect that could drive a project or infill project to a great success or project's achievement. Another thing, I was keep thinking about the beauty that you mentioned at the beginning, how these people approach to you, and then this project is beautiful, and how that effect is even widespread. Could be a certain aspect, could be wider spread than just immediate users, which we obviously talk about the contribution of the immediate neighbors and users and residents. And I think, so this nature of attaching on project, this infill, the attaching on nature of infill, and whether the the new structure is integrated to the existing structure or added on. I think it opens up some sort of a architecture expression opportunity, and also fosters the innovation for the material and process. And I think if one project or a project is perceived this infill project as almost like a chance to innovate, I think and I think it's happening. It's as the one aspect I didn't really thought actually about is financial aspect, how it drives every project almost like an even out. And because a long time I thought it was a cultural thing. And for me personally, I appreciate a project a lot when they can stand out almost clearly different, but at the same time holding a meaningful dialogue with the existing structure. It may be material, it may be what it's giving out, and I think this effect and impact can be measured a little longer time. I want to end with a very cheesy quote that I really like about the city, is that from Patrick Geddes, saying the city is not only a place in space. It's not a place in a space, but a drama in time. So I like what's happening and this how urban infill can add on new layer of time. And I think I would like to see it as an opportunity to also see the pass of time, and then pass is layering onto the city. So I hope this financial challenge we can overcome to have a little more diverse development of the infill project.
Fantastic. I'm almost scared to ask you guys if you want to follow this. But we should. Best practice ideas from you two before we end.
From my point of view, it is very important to focus on designing spaces which provide additional value or experience. I do not focus so much on other aspects because what I'm into is creating a space which follows a certain choreography people are into, which helps people to interact, providing shelter and creating spaces for exchange. This is what you should focus on. From my point of view, other aspects are given. As an architect, I do confess I spend the money I get. Yeah? If I have a certain budget, I will most likely be slightly on top of it finally, but make it. If I have to use certain material, I use what I got. I'm not focused on a certain material. If I finally will work within a really circular economy, awesome, let's do it. But what you really need to do is to focus on the space you design, and that's what I say what you should be after.
Yeah, maybe to add to this, I also would never stretch a certain material to be as a best practice material to use. Yeah? In this case here, timber was the one solution that fitted the best, but I would never rule out any other material choice, because it is always to be used to its challenge and to its best use and efficient use. But we have discussed this already. You wouldn't be efficiently able, for example, to span timber of way more than 5 meters, for example. It is possible, obviously, but it's not a best practice. So if you need more space like we need here, for example, then concrete or steel comes directly to mind. So the best practice is actually to use the material as it's appropriate for, and that's where we link in our work together. And another best practice that I would say is always, especially regarding infill, always to look at the existing surrounding and thoroughly check it, in all aspects, in the architectural, in the social aspects, but also from my point of view, from my perspective, in the structural aspect. And if you don't have the drawings, the documents that show you what has been built there, then you have to dig into the existing foundation and in structure. And sometimes we have a challenge in promoting that to our client. Because it involves usually a lot of financial risks that you put out there in front before you even start building. Yeah. And not everyone is willing to do that for maybe obvious reasons, but in the end, it pays back. So that might be one of the best practices.
There's a lot to consider no matter how you approach it. It's a multi-pronged, extremely complex thing. I would like to give the floor to the audience for questions. And there's a question right up front.
I have a question for Neil. Since you said this was one of the smallest projects in your portfolio, but just as complex and difficult to solve, was there one lesson that was absolutely transformative that you would bring to your larger projects, perhaps, that you learned in terms of the engineering part of this design? Thanks.
I don't know if I understood correctly. So, was there one lesson we took out from this project that we want or will apply to other projects, maybe? Yeah, obviously you learn with every project, and I know a few colleagues, structural engineers. They are way over 60, and they say they're still learning. It never ends in the construction industry itself, probably, yeah, but especially in architecture and structural design. I can't name a specific lessons learned from this maybe for myself. For the group of us who were involved in all this, it was a very yeah, it went very smoothly. Well, maybe now I'm coming up with something because there was just one hiccup in all over the construction. So we've already mentioned that the construction phase itself was very brief. The piling for the construction for the basement was done in a week. The timber construction itself was done in 2 weeks. But in between, this small concrete strip that we put around the basement took 6 months. And it was very, very simple, actually. And in the end, it was done in 3 days when another contractor came on site. So that's why internally myself, I'm calling this project also the Red Devil. Because devil always lie in the detail, and it was this the simple detail that we haven't spotted from the beginning. That yeah, we should have looked in more thoroughly maybe, but yeah, everything went smoothly after, and so that was one of the lessons learned maybe.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thanks a lot. My question is about biodiverse greenery and how to integrate it into buildings. Maybe more specifically, to what extent is it like task of an architect to integrate or plan greenery into a building? And maybe on how you did it in House 2+, what were like specific challenges in integrating greenery into that?
Integrating greenery. I think the important, especially in the urban infill project, is one aspect we didn't talk about and quickly touched upon was the soil sealing issue. And it was interesting, the brick site already was sealed. So that kind of doesn't change the dynamic of how water will flow and how the whole new construction would have an impact on the heat island effect, for instance. So I think the more and more the city is getting warmer, it's getting more heavy rain unexpectedly, and integrating green is always a very important way of cope with this climate, whether it's very small or large. We wanted to, so you could see we implemented one roof terrace, but there's tiny bit we tried to use as a green roof, although it's not really was encouraged from the contractor of timber. Contractor to include. I don't think there you see. And currently we are also looking at in different projects, how to integrate the green facade. I think it's very important for us to also cope into living in the city, how to deal with the changing climate and changing situation. Also doesn't have a bad impact to the neighbors, how to, by constructing something new. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I think we have time for one more. This might be the last one.
Hi. So actually, I have had many questions, but I will just summarize in one. Our job as architects is to provide solutions that are ever changing and ever growing with each generation. And my worry after working in Germany for 4 years is that eventually we drown in the bureaucracy and trying to find all of the problems and try to tackle every little solution, that eventually the project in itself would take about 10 years, and by then the project has become obsolete. I personally work for the public sector, with the public sector, so I struggle personally with that. So I think the job of the architect is now to try and come up with creative solutions within the public sector and within the public regulation, let's say, to try and drive evolution, to drive development a bit further, faster, and to try to fulfill the need of this ever fast-moving society. Have you had any sort of experience with that, and maybe something a bit more concrete into how the east side of Berlin, that is unfortunately still very underdeveloped in comparison to the inner ring, how could there be projects to develop and new experiences and new potential, so to speak?
That might be for you, Sven, I think.
Well, let's see. First thing is looking into Germany or into Germans for a second. I think challenging for Germans, and I would say us in this case, is we are pretty afraid of doing things wrong. And we always avoid to do things wrong in general. Particular individual Germans might be different, but as a group, you would say if you do nothing, you can't do anything wrong. So in German perspective, not your perspective, in projects where I'm involved, I always try to create an atmosphere which is positive in that way, that it is easier to say yes than say no. What Germans do dislike even more than doing things wrong is to have a continuous feeling of being stuck. So you need to create an atmosphere that saying yes or following a certain road is easing it for people. And if you can create such an atmosphere, you will experience progress. But this particular part of German angst is really an issue and is really slowing down the whole construction industry in Germany, design process, permission process a lot. And this is a surprising, intense and important role for architects from my point of view, to have a certain moderation in such situations and create this positive understanding with everybody. And this is where I find a lot of my work is actually based in such talks. Less drawings, less, unfortunately, yeah, but interesting.
Maybe to add to this, I think it's exactly what you say. The positive environment needs to be there, and what is usually a big challenge or problem, and I think that has been worsened through the COVID pandemic we all have behind us, is that communication was deteriorating. Yeah, so people many people are not or have become more fearful to communicate openly, and only in such a positive environment you can also maybe a more blame-free environment. You can communicate more freely and openly, and also more contributing. Yeah.
And put solutions first.
And put solutions first. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But the bureaucratic aspect.
I would like to quick add. So I think I can tell I can feel the frustration too. I think a lot of times the rules and regulation and norms comes before you can create something new in here. And I actually believe there is a counter movement. I'm not super familiar with it yet, so I don't want to say it, but I heard something called Gebäude E, so the building simple. And what I learned by constructing this building is a lot of things are happening based on the rules and norms rather than people's rational thoughts. And that's why we really like working with Niels, and Niels was thinking more out of how the material property would work and then think more from the base. And I think that's very important too when we come up with solving the solution rather than following, okay, this rule, you have to follow this size of number to create this. But actually think more rationally and then come to your own senses, okay, this could work. And then you slowly start a little innovation based on rationality rather than countering the rules. I think it's very important to go back to the basics and how you think about things. That was my conclusion after building this. And this, as Sven mentioned, this is our first project. If I knew all the rules I had to kind of punch through to build this, I might have not designed this way. And it was kind of that kind of lack of experience or naivete drive us, and then drove Niels crazy sometimes to solve for us. Okay, can we please have this recess here? And then Niels like, I have to think about it. But he did a fantastic job, and we are very happy with the result at the end.
It's a gorgeous building. I could just throw this out there. I used to come here a lot before anything existed, when it was Bar 25. Back in the old days, the counterculture days, and it's really nice to see this welcoming red house in the new iteration of this waterfront space. We will have more time for you to talk to the panelists in a drinking session in a little bit. We can have, we can all meet and greet a bit, but before that, I would like to invite Holcim Foundation board member Stuart Smith to give a few words about the foundation. Thank you so much also for your attention and your participation. And thank you. Stuart, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you very much. I'll borrow a line from Sven. I'm here because I'm old. I'll use that again. But also because I'm interested and passionate about the work and the awards program that we run. Niels, you said it very well. I think we find ourselves spending so much time on smaller projects as much as on bigger projects, and so this question of scale and impact is always raised through the awards program and through the way we look at projects. And I think we heard tonight that this project has actually lots to learn from it, and lots of lessons and lots of complexity, and a fantastic project. And I'm really impressed. This is your first project, is that right? Yes, it's amazing. Congratulations. And I think that's one of the things I really love about the Holcim Awards, that we pick out projects like this from designers like you guys and showcase it and share it. And of course, the awards are regional, and so that raises the issues that come up in each region. So today we've been talking about an infill site in Berlin, talking about the way we use materials, talking about circularity. I think you're also talking about carbon impacts as well, and whether we should be using timber, and how we build and what we contribute when we do these projects. And that, of course, in Europe is a very topical issue. I sat on the Latin American jury last year, and the conversation was very much about water and water scarcity. So it's also very interesting to take that global reach on awards and then bring everyone together. And we all were in Venice together celebrating the winners of the Holcim Awards, and we'll be doing the same again next year. The awards close on February the 11th, so I hope that you'll be inspired to maybe submit your projects. There's some money involved, but for me what I find really exciting is being part of the community and being able to share these stories, talk about our projects, and hopefully it's a platform for designers to go on and do great work. So in our history of 20 years plus, we've had people like Francis Carrera recognised at a very early stage in their careers before the industry picked them up. And I'm very proud of that, and always very proud to support and generate the next generation to recognise innovation. We all know working in Germany that's incredibly difficult to do, but you can get through it, and you can deliver these projects. So fantastic! Thank you for presenting to us, and also the audience. Thank you for coming on a Monday night, slightly cold in November, to join us and be here. We would be wasting our time without you. So thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on the project. Thank you.
The bar is open, I guess. Thank you.